Hi, this is an in-depth walkthrough tutorial for my brand new plugin for DaVinci Resolve Proto V3. Now I want to be clear about specifically what this video is. This is a walkthrough of all the controls you have access to. We're going to show off a bit what Proto can do, but it's not like this is going to be a, hey, here's the final effect, let's make it. We're just going to walk through the effect as is so that when you are using the effect in your timeline in Resolve, you know what the buttons do. And there are a lot of buttons. I am going to be sharing a lot of essential sort of like tangential information along the way. Lots of stuff about installation, where the presets are actually loaded, things you need to know if you want to use Proto in the Fusion page, things like that. Some quirks along the way, some really powerful stuff that's like a little hidden and you might miss on first pass. So I think this video will be very, very useful. And first things first, with installation, this is a big change from version 2. Version 2 used sort of like an external tool inside the effect, and because of that, installation was much more complicated. V3 is a DRFX, like all my other presets and plugins I've made for DaVinci Resolve. So once you download it, you can unzip that, and then you'll just have a single DRFX file, double click, and it will be loaded into Resolve for you. Sometimes that requires a restart of Resolve. Most of the times not though. If it doesn't work for you, if you get the pop-up saying you want to install, you click yes and you still can't see it, maybe just restart Resolve. But once you do that, I'm on a timeline here in Resolve. If I open up my effects library, I go to Generator, Sterling Supply Co. I have Proto V3. I can drag this to my timeline, and hey, all the cool Proto goodies are there. Now, this does live as a generator, like text or other generators in Resolve. It lives completely on its own in the timeline, and I do have several ways you can use this with images or video, but also, because of feedback I got in early access, if you go to Effects, Sterling Supply Co., you also have a Proto V3 effect version. And if I come over to just this video I have in my timeline, I can drag and drop this directly onto that clip, and it will use like an edge detect node in Fusion to look for the edges and automatically apply Proto to those. We'll get to the different ways to use images and video in the generator version of Proto, but it is a valuable feature that this also lives as an effect version. There are some things this effect version can't do, but if you know you want this just like right on video, this is an option for you. Second, I want to call out that for both of these versions, it does have this little icon in the inspector, which actually opens this effect in the Fusion page. This is valuable if you want to use another option we'll get to in a bit. But then if you double click these, you can just see how Proto was built. I do that with all of my plugins. We're not going to super go into like how it's built in this time, but all that to say, you can always open up if you want to learn more about how it was made. Okay, Proto V3 has 3 general like pillars. And when I talk about Proto V3, I'm going to be talking mainly about this generator version. It has source controls, style controls, and then like general effects. At the top, we do have these presets. Important to call out that there are 25 presets here, tons of different styles. These are very cool. Some of them are really different and out there, but all of these different presets are made just changing the controls the user has access to inside these style controls. We'll talk more about that when we get to style controls, but first we have source controls. By default, this is set to text, but if you open up this drop down, you can see we have a simple line. I will choose back to Jewel for this. We can see we have a line, text, an ellipse, rectangle, poly sharp, poly smooth, poly for polygon, poly custom. We'll talk a lot about this soon because nothing shows up at first. And then we have a few different sort of like external source options. We have a loader, which is how Fusion can bring in images. So if you click this browse, you can search for anywhere on your computer and pull in an image. I include this arrow by default. But any other images, it will sort of like pipe through this same edge detect system. We have media pool, which will give you media offline at first. But if I come to my media pool, I have that same dancing man we looked at earlier. If I drag this into this clip name box, it will then use that video clip and like edge detect and run that through Proto. We have background, which again does nothing by default, but hey, one more time to the dancing man. If I bring this over the dancing man, this background source looks at whatever is beneath it on this timeline. I have this other game footage we'll look at later. And if I bring Proto over now, it looks for all edges on that and applies Proto. And then we have custom Fusion. If I click that, Nothing will super change for now. If I move this back, we'll see this errors out. But this is when you would need to open that effect in Fusion. And you'll notice that this main Proto effect like bundle has this open input here. And if I create this ellipse mask, I will uncheck solid, pull up the border width a little bit. If I plug that into Proto, it will use that custom mask that I just created. Now, like Proto does have an ellipse source setting you could do, but it doesn't have an ellipse plus rectangle setting. So this is really useful if you want to use Proto in the Fusion page. It has that open input. Just change the source control to custom Fusion, and the rest of Fusion will just work as it does in any other source. For instance, with this new custom mask I have plugged in, I have full access to all these different presets still. But this is also a great time to talk about some kind of like meta changes. I will go back to the edit page for this. And I will pull up, go back to line for now. You might have noticed that when I've changed these sources, the controls you see in the inspector also change. When I have this set to line, I have that line thickness, as well as the length of this line. If you want to animate that drawing on, you can. If you pull down this length, then you have this access to position when you can just slide it along that path. And likewise, when I go to text, I have all those text controls. Same for ellipse, rectangle, polygon, which we'll touch more on soon. For these external tools, like the loader, we have a few different options. I'm going to jump ahead. We have this external source underlay. If you click that, you will actually see the media it is pointing to, whether that's for loader or media pool. But you also have these edge detect controls, which lets you really, let me go ahead and change this to media pool. We're still pointing at this thing. These edge detect controls really let you dial in, like specifically like what counts or what the edge detect like node really recognizes. So like you can kind of eliminate like some of these lines if you want, but then it will just look for like the more evident lines. So some things here, like his arm, just don't get included. If I go back to this poly smooth, you'll see we have those same outline controls, super useful for things like here, as well as this main outline button. If you want this to be solid, you can go for it, but like a lot of times outline is kind of what you are looking for. And all of these source controls also have these source transform controls, which if you just like bring all this down, you'll notice that like the effect itself is changing. This is scaling or positioning or rotating the source before all the distortion or glow is applied. So like it does look different here. Now, we've talked about how these controls that you have that are visible change based on what you select. But this also extends to the viewer itself. If I come to this dropdown, click Fusion Overlay, I will double click this source scale to get it back up. You'll notice I have these little drag and drop controls, not drag and drop, but these controls in the viewer to change the width of this rectangle. But if I change to ellipse, I just have these circle controls here. If I come to this poly smooth, I can directly grab points on this mask or even add points to change that. The controls you have access to in the viewer also change based on this source control. This is a massive improvement from V2, where both the inspector and like these overlay options were a mess. So this is much, much better. Now, some specific things I want to talk about. This custom Fusion, if I open this back up and like connect this ellipse, if I pull this up, cool. All I want to say is that if you want to use this in Fusion, right now it's not the most smooth because of all the controls with these source settings and these presets are kind of hard coded in a way that if you have more than one copy of Proto in your Fusion comp, you will like lose access to these like drop downs. So other controls will kind of work. So like if I just like copy this over here and set a rectangle that bring this down. If I then come into this copy of Proto and try to change these presets, nothing will happen. These other actual like not hard coded, but these other like style controls themselves, these will still work. So if you want to like change these controls, including the distortion and other stuff, which we will get to later. I can't get it I shouldn't get distracted. You can still adjust them here, but you also can't change like these source controls. So if you are using this in Fusion and want multiple copies of Proto, just make sure you set this source control to custom Fusion before you copy the node, or, set it to whatever source you want the copy to be before you copy the node. If you come back to the original, this will still work because like all the code and expressions still work on this single copy. It just breaks when you copy it. You can still change these style controls and other things, but just like these two drop downs break, but there are ways to work around that. But let me go back. I'll completely reset that because we are also want to look at this poly custom source control. Now, like I showed off, these poly sharp and poly smooth, they are very similar, and you can modify them right in this viewer, even add points, change like the easing on these things. It is very flexible, but if you want more control, you can change this to poly custom. If I do that in my overlay here, you can see I have a single dot here. And if I select that, nothing happens, right? You can select it, but what? What's going on is that if I open this in Fusion, on the edit page, if I click Proto, you'll see we have this toolbar up here. And that is how you would actually interact with this mask. Right now it is set to modify or insert and modify only, but when you just have a single point that doesn't do something, if I change this to click append, once we have that point selected, then you could add points. But if I go back and make sure this is on the default insert and modify, over on the edit page, we don't have access to that toolbar, right? But we actually do have access to those controls if you select this point and then right click and go to custom poly path. That is the path we have selected. And here we see those options, insert and modify, click append. If I change this to click append, then boom, I can connect this back up. I can even leave it open if I want. It is important to note that after the fact, it is going to be best to change that back to insert and modify, because if you jump to another source, this path will still be selected, but that is pretty neat. And then you can completely from scratch build your own. Another super cool thing I wanted to show off is the additional option right next to that click append, we have draw append. And then now if I click on that dot, I can then just move my mouse and draw the custom path I want. If there is something, I can even close that, can I? Maybe I would have to zoom in. Point. Oh, wait, I don't know if this will. Oh yeah, it can close up. Maybe you want to draw over something you have in another piece of media. You can custom do that. You can just get the specific outline for something this way. After a release, I might look at other like general outline options. Anyway, I'm not going to talk too much stuff about post-release. I've got plans, but we'll see how it goes. But I also wanted to call out, we do have an insane amount of individual points here, but we have some extra tools we can use here. If I select all of these, I can right click, and if I come to this custom poly path, we have so many options here. You can add extra smoothing, stuff like that, but we also have reduce points. If I bring down this precision a lot, you can see how many, I believe this knots is how many like actual points it's created or actually using. If I pull this down, click OK, my shape will change a little bit. But now it's easy to see, like here, we have significantly less dots. It's looked at the general path and kind of thought, okay, how many points do we really need to get this path? And this is a kind of complicated path, so we still have quite a few, but it's like added custom easing. It's done a lot for us. Now we don't have over 200 points. You can use this right click menu on like these other, like the line path or the poly sharp and poly smooth path, but I kept this custom poly option completely for those who want a lot of control and are willing to navigate this slightly more advanced system. You can get a lot done with these poly sharp or poly smooth options, but these poly custom options, that's the trade-off. You can do a lot more, but you just have to use the slightly more advanced system. So like that is a point where like this video was really essential because people might really not find that insane right click menu with all these other options. But if I completely reset this and then come to the source poly custom, you just have this single point. And then you need to go through all those other steps. So hopefully you're okay with that trade-off. But by default, nothing is here, but you just have to sort of like opt into that program. I think it's a valuable trade-off. I don't know. Let me know what you think. But we are going to move on because that all was really just like this first pillar of Proto, all these different source options. after you have that source, it runs all of that. Is there anything else I want? I talked through these outline controls. And even, oh man, even on text, like pulling down this length and changing this position, even right click on this position, add an expression. I shouldn't get distracted, but if I like time divided by like 40, now this will rotate around the text. This is also something you couldn't do in version 2, specifically with text. It's super cool. Anyway, I wanted to talk about that specifically with text. I think we are clear to move on to style controls. Okay, we are going to stick on text for this. And like I said, we have 25 different presets. All of these looks are made just changing the controls you have access to inside these style controls. So let's talk about them. For these, I'm going to change my preset actually to still, which is, it's got some glow, but it has like no distortion, no other stuff. So we can start looking at style controls. And again, in here, we have several like mini little areas or sub pillars or something. We have core controls and aura controls. Okay, core is this main tight beam in the middle. If I pull down the opacity, you'll see that goes away. We have a slight blur here. I'm gonna turn off this overlay at first. But if I pull that up and then pull down the core and then open up the aura controls and pull down that opacity, you'll see like, okay, it's just like this like extra, not quite glow, but like glowy expanded area. I said not quite glow because we're doing interesting stuff. Okay, so core controls. You have this amount on this core, which is like this like initial like thickness pass, and then you have that opacity for how vibrant you want it. This core does also have its own initial soft glow. For a lot of energy type stuff, you'll probably want this on. I added this option for a lot of like the flatter or 2D looks we can create. But inside core controls, we also have this still core control. If I pull down this opacity, I can toggle on this still core again, and it's just like another copy, but we might circle back to this because this is really useful when we start adding on distortion to this. Because this still core will not be affected by that distortion while this main sort of core will. So we have core, that optional still core, and then aura, which by default is this just like little area, but inside aura, we have texture controls. By default, this detail and scale are low. If I pull up detail, you see it changes a little bit, and if I pull up scale, you see, oh, now we have this real sort of like smoky texture. I'm gonna bring down, oh yeah, this like still glow a little bit. So this scale, pull this down, you see, okay, we have like this smoky texture. This detail is how much detail gets added if you pull the scale down, but pull up the detail, you still have some options. You can specifically change the angle of how this rotates if you just want to adjust the look a little bit, or you could even animate this angle. Back up, we do have this scale lock, because this scale, by default, it's uniform. But if I uncheck this, we have X and Y, and you can see by default, it stretches at this angle. If the Y is all the way down, this X comes up, and I zero at this angle again, that noise is just up and down. Or if I do it the other way, the noise will just be left and right, which again, you can change with this angle. Then you have texture contrast for, how much contrast you want between those bright and dark areas, and like a general brightness. And then two controls that you'll see in a few different areas, because this whole texture system is based off the fast noise node inside Fusion. I'm gonna lock this scale back together so we just see this like generic smoke texture. If I click this style, you'll see it just looks a little differently. Instead of like clouds, this is kind of like bulbousy clouds, especially if I mess with this like contrast or things like that. It just looks a little bit differently. If I uncheck that but click invert, it will just be like different kind of looking clouds. But if you check both of these, you get, much more tendrily kind of texture here, especially if I scale out. You can see this looks like a bit like more like organic, those like tendril vibes versus like this kind of smoke texture. So these are just like different options you can see. You can always play with these to get these different looks, or click through the presets to see how they have used these different looks. But again, this is just all affecting the texture on that same aura control. If I then pull this amount, that will pull it in, or pull this opacity and make it darker. In this aura control, I also have this blur size, because what this is really doing is just like duplicating the core and like duplicating it, increasing the size, and then blurring it to get the mask to show this texture. So if you pull down this blur size, it will still show that texture, but within like very hard defined bounds. Okay, texture controls, let's move on. Because we have these core controls and aura controls, and then distortion controls. And these are separate because these distortion controls affect both of these. Let me go ahead and change this. I'm going to change this to another preset and then change back to still. If you jump away from a preset, then jump back, it won't save any of the things you have changed. Anytime you move to a preset, it loads the defaults for that preset. So we are back to this main still, and now we are looking at distortion. In this still core is off, so we only have this single copy. And if I pull up distortion, all of a sudden things get crazy. Even like a little nudge there gets it crazy. But if I do that, we get some pretty intense distortion right on this core. And here, I want to be clear explaining, but also we have a few controls that at first glance look like they kind of do really similar things, but it's all about the different ways these can interact. So we have distortion strength, and then we also have this like scale, which you can kind of see if you pull the scale down. It is using that other fast noise. So think the size of the noise, the scale is low, so they're like big blotches. So like as those big blotches move by, it distorts things by this amount. But then we also have like detail, which like adds more complexity there. And we have contrast. And contrast especially works with this distortion. If you pull up this distortion, but pull down contrast, you will have no distortion, right? Because the contrast on the fast noise that is driving the distortion is like goes away completely. So you could have like really low distortion, but like really high contrast, or like really high scale, but like low distortion. So you would have like lots of distortion, but the detail would be pretty fine, or pull the scale down and the distortion way up with this contrast down, and you would get no movement at first, because this is distortion, and then we have animation controls. But you would see like this gets to some of these like wobbly presets I have, where it's not like fine detail, but it's pushing the actual image pretty far, but just in large patches. And again, we have these style switch and inverted controls, which especially at the more like fine detail will just like present that distortion like with slightly different like patterns, as well as this position offset, which like at first it is funky because it like slides things in these regards. But if you have high distortion and you'd like toggle on these different options or contrast, this position offset, sometimes when you change these controls as like a byproduct of how the system works, it will shift like the overall image in a certain direction that you might not like. So this position offset is kind of just to correct for some of those moves. Now, I'm going to skip color for now and come to animation controls, because we're going to go back and forth. Ooh, first, let me go back and turn on these still core, and then now you can see what kind of this is doing. So that still core doesn't move at all, but this distortion control does. If I pull up this angle, you'll see how this distortion is changing, but the still core is not. You can also see this if I come to animation controls. Here we have a seethe for the core and the aura, as well as wind controls. If I pull up, I'm going to turn off those still core options. If I pull up this core seethe a little bit, then now you'll see this moves over time. If you really crank this up, you'll get that faster motion. And the aura seethe is on that texture. So let me do some of that aura. I want to see that texture, and then I want like texture, yeah. And then something like that. Okay, so the core aura changes primarily just that distortion, but the aura seethe is the seethe inside that texture. So if I pull this core seethe back down and the aura seethe, you see it is not like changing the position necessarily of that, but the texture inside of that. Now, if I pull these back down to 0, we have these wind controls. If I pull up this speed just a little bit, you'll notice both of those textures change, and it is actually pushing those textures slowly up. If I increase this speed, you'll notice that it is affecting both of those, and it is moving up at this set speed. It is moving up because this wind direction is set to 90. If you set this to 0, it'll be pushing that all to the right. Pull up this speed a lot, you'll get some dramatically different looks, even with this core seethe and aura seethe set all the way back down to 0. I think I want this maybe just a little bit of wind speed, but mostly aura speed here. Yeah, so now we have this generic little energy effect here. Let's go back to color, because some of the color controls are really powerful. By default, this is a solid color that you can change up here. You have just, color controls, and then you have a master saturation slider if you really want to push that, or even have it go back to black and white, you can do that. And then we have a master hue slider. This is especially useful for animation, because if you shift this, it starts cycling through all of these colors without you having to animate anything here. And then we have a gain and gamma slider. This gain will push like the brighter areas of that image, and the gamma, those darker areas. Depending on presets, sometimes I change these. They are at solid defaults a lot of the time, but if you want to adjust like the main like color look or how like punchy some of the light is, or even like pull this down and get some like interesting, like almost like spooky looks with this low gamma, you're free to do that. But that is when this type is set to solid color. Hey, if I change this to horizontal, then we have now this horizontal gradient with 2 colors we can control, or vertical with this vertical gradient. If I do something like that, this is across the entire image. But we also have 4 corner, which I can change to do stuff like that, but also 4 corner across the entire image. And finally, we have this gradient option, which if I toggle back on my overviewer, now we have this little line we can grab. So we can set a custom gradient along this line and add new colors in here to do all kinds of stuff. And because this option down here for this interpolation space, some of these options are like advanced options, not super important, other than if you just change this to repeat and then pull up this offset, you'll notice that like, oh, you have kind of this like strobing texture if you want it. Anyway, you can poke around a lot more here. But because this interpolation space is set to HLS, it cycles really smoothly between these hues. If you just have this to RGB, then it can get like kind of like gray and mushy in the middle and not transition as well. But HLS looks really great, handles that transitions. And if you set this to gradient, then this line sort of does give you a lot more of that fine control. And it's pretty slick. If you want this to loop really correctly, I would bring this point in and then have this just be red on both sides, and then like it would fade back and forth really smooth. Let me again set this back to our default still and look at these last few options we've got. After this animation and color controls, we have masking controls. Actually, I will jump to another preset like this jewel preset here. So on masking controls, this is interesting because masking, the kind of masking you have access to, does change based on your source. So if you have text through these polygon options, then inside masking, you'll have these 3 checkboxes: mask core, mask aura, and invert. If I click mask core and mask aura, you'll see it will cut out the inside of this text, gives us this funky different look. If I click invert, it will only show us the inside of the text. I really love the look of when you mask the core, or when you mask the aura, but not the core. If I uncheck mask core, you'll see we see like the entire thickness of that core and the glow affecting both the inside and the outside. But now this invert only changes whether the aura detail shows on the inside and outside. If I come up to my style aura controls and really like increase that opacity, and like do crazy stuff with this contrast or other detail, or like scale, just add lots of glow on the middle, then now this masking will be super evident whether it's all on the inside or outside. Some of the presets have this kind of masking built in, like what? like this specter, kind of like, ooh, scary, ghostly, I am masking only the core and I am inverting that. So instead of like that, we just see like inside of these like little portals here, tons of different looks in Proto. But if I change this to something, this source control to that media pool, which now I will have look at that dancing man again and change this to something like, what's a fun one? Storm cloud? Nah, not storm cloud. Deep end. So we have this, nah. What do I want? What do I want? Yeah, a bright glowing one. Like voltage, I will turn on my external source underlay. So now we have this bright energy overlaid with this image. For these sort of external source options, these masking controls change to just like generic, not generic, but just some like basic whole image masking. So you can toggle on a rectangle mask, which will only show Proto inside that rectangle mask. You have your standard width and height, like corner radius if you want to round that off, soft edges if you want to blur that, or like an ellipse mask if you want your glow, if you want your glow confined to a certain area of the screen, these basic masks can handle that for you. Again, reset, back on Jewel, and after masking is just a post effects transform. You will remember that source transform, if we changed this, it did change the look of the effect because that was changing the source. It's really evident here because this Jewel preset has this horizontal gradient. So at the bottom of the screen, it's blue. At the top, it's kind of that red purpley. But this post effect transform is a set of these transform controls completely after all the color and glow work is done. So now if I shift this, the actual image stays exactly the same. And this is especially useful when we get to these next options for tracking. We have built-in tracking. Okay, I'm going to change this source to loader, which by default is this arrow. And I'm going to bring this over and put this right over this bit of gameplay I have, which is busy, lots going on, but we're going to take advantage of this. If I come down, I have tracking controls. Now, say I wanted to track this image, I have this arrow, and I want this arrow pointed at this little like fishing pot in this game over here. Now I can track this image, but first things first, like it's extra busy with this giant glowing arrow over it. So I have this tracker preview. If I click that, it will just get rid of what Proto is creating. We will just see whatever is beneath Proto on the timeline. And if I have my Fusion overlay on, and then I click this tracker button, you will see this sort of tracking window. So if I come forward, put it over that little fishing pot, I can then track that. If you put your mouse over and just move it around, you'll see that point moving around until it is complete. And at that point, turn off your preview tracker, and the arrow is still there, it's still big and stuff. But now if I go back to these post-effect transforms, scale this down, rotate a little, and then just point this at this little crab pot, then when I play, boop, you'll notice that arrow is staying stuck right to that little track pot because that is what we tracked. If you change this to no tracker, it will like completely undo all that. Once you have tracked something, this tracking point kind of does stay on screen, but you know, a small trade-off for something else on your overlay when you have access to super easy tracking right on your edit page. That's built-in tracking. I will reset again. And this last area we have is just background controls. If you click this, you can have a solid background. This is also useful if you are using it in the Fusion page. Sometimes just for preview, if you want this over black, you can see what it looks like, since a lot of time, if you render this on the edit page, it will be over black. But also, if you toggle on a background, you have this background style, you can change to show you your edit page background. So especially if you're using this in the Fusion page or want to do any more advanced stuff in Fusion, you can always preview this background while inside the Fusion page. If you use this on the edit page, not a whole lot will change because even if you turn this off, like it's still looking at whatever's behind it all the time. But just a little bit more flexibility. And then, heyo, that's the end of Proto, but that was a lot. I think I covered the niche use cases I wanted to, but you know, broad review, right? You have source controls, which can be all those options for text or the paths or custom paths you can draw, or a loader to look at an image, or a media pool or the background option to look at video, or you can use just the effect version of Proto. Oh, super important to call out. This effect version doesn't have like that built-in tracking, and of course you can't change the source at all, but like the presets and the style controls and like the edge detect controls, those are exactly the same. So if you love one of the presets, or you find a set of controls that creates an effect, or that creates a glow and distortion and stuff you really like in the standalone, you can just use those same settings over on the effect and it will do like the same. The style controls, the engine of Proto is exactly the same from the generator to the effect version. But whatever source control you use, you have access to these style controls, changing specifically the core or like the root of the glow, and then the aura. You can add extra texture in there. And then you have custom distortion controls where you can balance, you know, this strength, scale, and contrast to create wildly different looks. Again, if I just, as I wrap up, walk through some of these different presets, all of these different presets were made using these style controls you have access to, including some like dramatically different looks. Like this groovy preset, a lot of this texture you see here is actually the core going through extreme distortion, but I have the still core copy. So like you can it's hard to break this. It's not, I mean, not hard to break it if you go crazy, but like there are some really cool, extreme, like niche use cases just by changing these different controls you have access to. I'm so excited for people to just like go through these different presets. They are super cool. I don't super know what my plans are for presets post-launch. I'm going to take another look at this system I'm using and see if there's an easier way, either for me to add more presets in the future or for users to like share their own presets they create based on these controls. There's tons of options I'm very excited about, but not as excited as I am to get this out to all of you in general. I think it's incredible. Even the changes of cleaning up this inspector and this overlay, I really, really like those. I really like Proto V3. So much work has gone into it. I never even made an in-depth video as in-depth of this for V2, even though I kind of always meant to. So I'm really happy I'm doing this like so close to launch as well. If you have any specific questions, drop them in the comments. If anything dramatically changes with Proto in the future, I'm sure I will make another video like this. So like stay plugged in, tuned in, pay attention to fun stuff going on over at Sterling Supply Co., because it might just be more really awesome stuff like Proto. I think that's everything I wanted to cover. I even covered niche fusion stuff and that fun path thing. If I miss anything major, it'll be in the comments. It'll be in the description. Check stuff out there. Stay plugged in. If you are watching this at release, we're in Proto week where like Proto has just come out. I'm sure it's stressful for me, but exciting. I think this is so cool. Hopefully you do too. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Hey, and somehow I didn't say link in the description if you want to buy Proto, because it's very, very cool. It's very, very cool. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.